What happens when the owner gets kicked out of his own showroom, simply because he dressed too casually? In a quiet corner of the parking lot, where the morning sunlight angled through the yellowing maple trees, a man stepped out of an old silver-gray sedan. His faded navy polo shirt, simple jeans, and worn sneakers gave him the look of an average father out shopping for his daughter's car. But this man, Nathaniel Brooks, was anything but average. He was the CEO of Brookstone Motors, the empire that owned more than 40 luxury car showrooms across the country, including the very one he was about to walk into. Today, he wasn't arriving as the boss, but as a modest father, wanting to see firsthand the service at a branch he had always trusted. And today, he would uncover a dark truth no one had dared to expose. The moment Nathaniel stepped through the glass doors, he could feel the shift in the air. Soft jewels played overhead, and the ceiling lights shone down on gleaming BMWs, Mercedes, and Audis parked on polished marble floors. But it wasn't the music or the lighting that gave him pause. It was the stares. A receptionist quickly turned away. Two salespeople whispered to each other before laughing a little too loudly. A sharply dressed man near the customer lounge gave Nathaniel a once-over, as if assessing the value of a used item. They didn't have to say a word. Everything about their body language made one thing clear: Nathaniel wasn't welcome here. He moved towards the center of the showroom, where a midnight blue BMW M8 stood under a spotlight, its paint glistening like it had been carved from sapphire. He smiled faintly, imagining the moment his daughter Celeste would receive this as a graduation gift, and gently reached out to touch the hood. But the smile vanished just as quickly as a commanding voice rose behind him. "Excuse me, sir. This area is reserved for premium clients." Nathaniel turned. A middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a stiff button-down shirt stood before him, a name badge clearly stating Cliff Morton, floor manager. His expression was laced with suspicion, even disdain. Before Nathaniel could respond, a security guard began making his way over, one hand already on his walkie-talkie. And right then, in that very moment, when the true owner stepped inside without being recognized, the disguise began, and the carefully polished mask of corporate culture started to crack, one layer at a time. Cliff Morton took a few steps forward, stopping just close enough to avoid being overtly rude, but his eyes made no effort to hide their disdain. "This model costs nearly $150,000. You might want to try the used Honda lot across the street," he said, maintaining a polite exterior, though every word carried the weight of condescension. Nathaniel didn't react, simply nodded and replied calmly, "I'm just looking at cars for my daughter. I didn't mean to bother anyone." The remark, seemingly harmless, lit a spark that instantly raised the temperature in the room. A quiet chuckle slipped from the consultation desk nearby, where two young employees sat with champagne flutes. One of them, named Trey, cracked a joke loud enough for all to hear. "Bet his daughter learned to drive in a go-kart." Laughter followed. An older woman walking past shook her head and whispered to the man beside her in a thick southern drawl, "People like that dreaming of cars like these?" Cliff folded his arms and nodded toward a tall security guard near the entrance. The guard understood immediately and approached with firm posture. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this area. You're disrupting the experience for other customers." Nathaniel looked up, his gaze still gentle but resolute. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just looking at a car. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't caused a scene." But Cliff wasn't backing down. "It's not about your behavior. It's about the kind of person who belongs here." He didn't say it outright, but the implication was unmistakable. The silence from everyone in the showroom confirmed it. The jeers had now turned into knives, silent but sharp, driving straight into dignity. This was no longer just rejection. It was humiliation, calculated and deliberate. Nathaniel looked around. His eyes swept over every face watching, from staff to customers. No one spoke up. Not a single word of dissent. Only silence. And in that silence he realized this was no longer a showroom. It was a stage. And they were all performing a script they had memorized about who is and who is not allowed to belong. Luis Ramirez, a seasoned security guard with eyes that had seen too much, approached with a serious but respectful expression. He stopped beside Nathaniel, tilted his head slightly and spoke in a firm, low voice. "Sir, I've been asked to escort you out of the showroom. I'd appreciate your cooperation so things can remain calm." Nathaniel nodded lightly, then turned to Cliff and spoke slowly. "I haven't caused a scene or disrespected anyone. But if that alone is enough reason to remove a customer, I'll leave." He pulled out his phone, typed a brief message, and slipped it back into his pocket. The action lasted only a second, unnoticed by anyone. Luis nodded and walked beside Nathaniel, his face thoughtful. The air in the showroom seemed to lighten as the glass door closed behind them. People returned to their tasks as if nothing had happened. But one person did not look away. Amara Green, a customer service associate who had been with the company for less than 3 months, had stood behind the reception desk the entire time. She had seen everything. The contempt in Cliff's eyes, the mocking laughter, the insults dressed up as courtesy. Her chest tightened as she witnessed it, but her hand stayed clenched around her clipboard, too afraid to speak. She needed this job. She was paying for her brother's college tuition and renting a room in a temporary shelter. One wrong word, and she knew she could lose it all. But Nathaniel's eyes as he exited through the glass, those were not the eyes of a man defeated. They were the eyes of a man counting down. Luis and Nathaniel walked through the parking lot. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked. "Luis Ramirez, sir. You were the only one here today who did your job right. Remember that." Luis furrowed his brow, unsure of the full meaning, but nodded instinctively. There was something in Nathaniel's tone that told him this wasn't over. As Nathaniel drove away, no one inside knew that the brief message he had typed moments earlier had just reached the phones of the chairman of the board, the head of human resources, and the in-house legal counsel. Inside the showroom, Cliff was still smugly recounting how he had dealt with some troublemaker like it was a minor triumph. And Amara, though her hands were still trembling, kept her eyes fixed on the closed door, as if she already knew that everything was just beginning. On the highway leading to the upscale residential district on the west side of the city, a silver sedan glided smoothly through the busy traffic. Inside, Nathaniel Brooks sat upright, eyes fixed ahead, his face expressionless, but his mind was burning. The humiliation that wore. Morningstar wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice, but it was the first time he realized it lived right at the heart of the company he built. He didn't need anger. He needed action. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A message from his personal assistant, Melissa Trin, appeared. "The full board has been cleared. The conference room will be ready in 40 minutes. That message was the signal. The power play was about to officially begin. Back at the showroom, Cliff was retelling the morning's events like a comedy sketch. I told him straight up, "People like you don't belong here." He couldn't say a word, just backed away like a beggar thrown out of a banquet. The other employees laughed. some out of admiration, others just because they didn't dare do anything else. Brad Kingsley, a veteran salesman, shrugged and joked, "We should hang a sign that says, 'Service for the appropriately dressed only.'" The room erupted in laughter, unaware that every word was being recorded, not by a camera, but by memories being threaded together in the mind of a young woman standing behind the reception desk. Amara, having witnessed the entire ordeal, opened her browser and typed in Nathaniel Brooks. The search results appeared almost instantly. Images of the black CEO featured on the cover of Forbes, articles about his acquisition of a luxury dealership chain 3 years ago, his keynote speech at the Global Business Summit in Berlin. A shiver ran down her spine. She now knew for certain. The humble man they had thrown out that morning was the CEO, the founder, the true owner of the very building they stood in. And they had cast him out like a beggar. Amara's heart raced. She had never seen things change so quickly. But her instincts told her the storm was only beginning to form, and it would sweep through this place with the force of a tornado, tearing apart every layer of performative corporate culture that had been left to rot for far too long. Exactly 1 hour later, the atmosphere outside Premier Auto Gallery fell silent, as if someone had reached out and clenched the air. A fleet of black luxury vehicles glided through the front gate like predators emerging from a morning fog. One by one, Bentley, Mercedes S-Class, Cadillac Escalade, they rolled to a stop in perfect alignment before the showroom's glass doors. The afternoon sunlight reflected off their windows like mirrors, poised to expose a long-hidden truth. Inside, Cliff was still boasting to a group of VIP clients about his earlier victory when he froze at the sight of the man stepping out of the lead Bentley. Nathaniel Brooks, not in a faded polo and worn-out sneakers, but in a deep charcoal-tailored suit, a Patek Philippe gleaming beneath his left cuff, and an unmistakably cold gaze. Behind him stood a formation that would make any executive swallow hard. Chief Legal Officer Isabel Tran, Chairman of the Board, Charles DuPont, Head of Human Resources Marvin Sloan, and all 3 senior strategic advisors. Inside the showroom, everything came to a halt. No more jazz music, no more clinking glasses. Just stunned faces and hands letting go of documents that floated to the floor. Brad dropped his champagne glass, the spreading stain on the carpet like a blemish that could never be erased. Cliff rushed forward, his face pale, clinging to the last thread of authority. "Sir, I believe I made it clear this morning that I didn't belong here," Nathaniel interrupted, his tone calm but sharp as a scalpel. A ripple of whispers swept through the showroom as employees suddenly connected the name Brooks with the man they had dismissed earlier. The air grew thick, suffocating, as Charles DuPont stepped forward without greeting or pleasantries. "This is Mr. Cliff Morton, correct?" Cliff nodded, legs barely holding him up. Isabel Tran approached, raised her tablet, and read aloud, each word crisp and deliberate. "Mr. Morton, effective immediately, your employment with Brookstone Motors is terminated for discriminatory conduct, professional misconduct, and actions detrimental to the brand's image. Mr. Brad Kingsley is likewise terminated on the same grounds." The final sentence dropped like a verdict in a closed courtroom. No one objected. No one defended. The 2 men who had been laughing just an hour earlier were now escorted out, their eyes lost in panic as they realized their entire careers had crumbled in the wake of a few seconds of unchecked power. As the glass doors closed behind Cliff and Brad, the entire showroom sank into a heavy silence, like a cathedral after a funeral. No one dared breathe too loudly. A few employees lowered their heads while others looked toward Nathaniel with a mixture of fear and reverence. He stood there, like a steel monument, silently sweeping his gaze across the people who had witnessed his humiliation without lifting a finger. Then he spoke, not with anger or resentment, but with a deep, steady voice that rang like a bell echoing through the midnight air. Today is not just about me. It's about everyone who has ever walked into a place like this and been judged for their appearance, their skin color, or their clothing. This is about change. Head of Human Resources. Marvin Sloan stepped forward, holding a comprehensive reform plan in his hands. Effective immediately, we are launching a mandatory training program focused on diversity awareness, equity, and workplace conduct. Additionally, every customer-facing policy will be reviewed to ensure that no silent exclusions are allowed to persist. Nathaniel gave a slight nod, then turned toward a familiar face, the young woman who had stood silently that morning, the one who had clearly been holding something inside. "What's your name?" he asked. Amara Green stepped forward, her voice trembling. Amara Green." She instinctively bowed her head, but Nathaniel stepped closer, looked her directly in the eye, and said with a warmth that softened the room, "You don't need to apologize. You saw it, you understood it, and you had the courage to feel that it was wrong. I'd like to speak with you further about a new opportunity, a leadership position I believe you're well suited for." A soft stir moved through the row of employees. Amara, still within her probation period, had just been offered a position by the CEO himself. It was not just a reward, but a testament that courage does not need to be loud, only timely. 3 weeks later, the sky over Los Angeles was as clear as if it had just been wiped clean by a brief summer storm. At Premier Auto Gallery, the showroom still looked exactly as it did the day Nathaniel Brooks walked in, wearing casual clothes, polished marble floors, gleaming cars aligned in perfect rows, soft jazz music floating through the air. But beneath the glossy surface, everything had changed. Amara Green now stood at the front desk in a tailored suit, her new name tag pinned to her chest reading, "Operations Manager." She no longer moved hurriedly, avoiding attention, but walked with calm confidence, as if she had finally stepped into the role she was always meant to fill. The glass doors opened automatically. A young woman entered, slender in frame, her face bright and brimming with confidence. Celeste Brooks, Nathaniel's daughter, had just completed her MBA at Stanford, and today was the day she would receive her graduation gift from her father. "My name is Celeste. I'm here to pick up a car," she said. Amara smiled warmly, stepping forward to welcome her, as though greeting an old friend. "We've been waiting for this day. Your car is ready." Nathaniel walked in behind his daughter, no longer the anonymous owner or the man in a faded shirt and worn shoes. Today, he was a proud father, a leader who had weathered the most grueling ethical test of his career and turned it into fuel to transform an entire system. When Celeste saw the midnight blue BMW M8, the very car her father had once been denied access to, she stood in silence for a few moments, then turned to Amara and said, "My father told me what you did. I'm so grateful you didn't stay silent." Amara nodded, deeply moved, while Nathaniel stood quietly beside them, his smile calm and steady, his eyes shining with faith in the generation that would carry the torch forward. 6 months later, Premier Auto Gallery was no longer just known as a luxury car showroom, but had become a model for how a company could transform its culture from the ground up. Customer satisfaction reached record highs, and job applications poured in from across the country, including from former employees who had once left feeling undervalued. The change did not come from firing one person or punishing a few. It came from the deep commitment of a leader who believed that no one has the right to determine another person's worth based solely on appearance. Nathaniel no longer needed to inspect the showroom in disguise. He walked in as himself, sometimes as a powerful CEO, other times as a simple father shopping for a car with his daughter. But whoever he was greeted with the same level of respect. Amara, now an inspirational figure across the entire Brookstone Motors network, was often invited to speak to new employees. She never told the story of who Nathaniel was, but instead spoke about what it felt like to stand before injustice and have to choose between silence and speaking out. During one of his visits, Nathaniel saw an elderly black couple being assisted by a young employee. The young man leaned in gently so the woman could hear him better, his face patient, his gaze full of respect. In another corner, a young man in a work jacket sat behind the wheel of a luxury sedan. No one dismissed him. No one judged him. Nathaniel smiled. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens with courage and conviction. As Celeste drove her new car away from the showroom for the first time, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her father standing there, watching her go. The look in his eyes was no longer that of a CEO, but of a man who had held on to the most important thing in building an empire: dignity. He hadn't just taught his daughter about success. He had taught the world about something greater: justice. Inside the expansive boardroom at Brookstone Motors headquarters, Nathaniel Brooks stood before dozens of branch leaders from across the country. Behind him, a large screen played a clip from the showroom's security footage on the day of the incident. The image of him, in plain clothes, being dismissed, turned away, and judged without justification. Then the screen shifted to the moment he returned with the senior leadership team, to the moment those who laughed at another man's humiliation were exposed and walked out of the company in silence. No one in the room dared to breathe deeply. Nathaniel looked at each person and said, "I don't need you all to remember my face that day. I need you to remember the feeling that anyone who has ever been looked down on has to swallow, silently endure. I didn't build this empire just to sell luxury cars. I built it to build trust. And from today forward, that trust must be placed on the table before any vehicle leaves a showroom." Following that event, Brookstone Motors implemented an entirely new standard across the system. Respect is not based on appearance, titles, or assets, but on how a person is approached and served. At each location, customers are now greeted with the words, "Thank you for being here. How can we support you today to make this experience as worthy as possible?" What seems like a simple sentence is the result of hundreds of hours of retraining and self-reflection, from frontline employees to branch directors. Amara Green is no longer just a manager. She has become the face of Brookstone Motors' new values: silent courage that does not compromise. She often shares with new employee groups, "When you witness injustice, don't ask yourself if you can change the world. Ask yourself if you're brave enough to turn 1 second of silence into the right words at the right time." Nathaniel Brooks' story spread across social media, quoted in leadership summits and corporate culture workshops. But for him, what mattered more was that the story was retold at family dinners, in business school classrooms, and during new employee orientations, places where ethics are no longer slogans, but lived actions. Because sometimes To repair an entire system, you don't need to change everything. You just need one moment of truth. One person being denied. One question dismissed. One look that dares to meet the gaze. And one man who dares to return, not for revenge, but to make things right with justice. In the world of business, dignity is not reflected in expensive suits or luxury cars, but in how we treat those who are different from us. The story of Nathaniel Brooks is not only a wake-up call about discrimination, but also a testament that when one person dares to stand up, an entire system can change. If you believe that respect should never be based on appearances, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep following stories that go to the heart of business ethics. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Respect matters," to help spread this message.